Requesting connection. Established. Encrypted. We're live. The show you've been asking for. Advice, technology, and community. Linux first, all others second. This is Ask Noah.
Live from Multispeed Technologies, the Ask Noah show starts right now. This is the show where we came to do all the things on Linux they said we couldn't do and take your questions on how to do the same. The phone lines are open this hour. If you'd like to be a part of the program, it is a free call, 1-855-450-NOAH. It's 1-855-450-6624. Send an email to live@asknoahshow.com. My name is Noah Chalaya. I am your host. Delighted to be here with you as another episode of the Ask Noah show kicks off this evening. Joining me, my co-host, Mr. Steve Ovens. Welcome in, sir.
Winter is back with a vengeance tonight, Noah.
So, do you know what a polar vortex is?
Yes, we get a couple of those every so often in Canada.
Okay, I see that. Do you know what a polar vortex collapse is?
I can't say that I'm specifically familiar, no.
I learned this today, Steve. What happens is warm air goes up and breaks the polar vortex, which then causes the collection of cool air at the top to somehow fall down. And meteorologists, much smarter than me, tell me that that means it's going to be even colder than it was had the polar vortex fell upon us. So we would prefer the polar vortex to the polar vortex collapse. This is kind of nonsense you deal with when you live where the air hurts your face. I bet nobody in California has ever asked themselves this questions.
They probably don't even know what a polar vortex is. It sounds like something from Star Trek.
I know, and yet it's a real thing that kills people. It's unreal. Anyway, so weather aside, you have any cool tech things that you did this week?
Oh, I'm always picking away at something or other. What did I do? I mean, I've just been doing random programming stuff. So I heard Chris from Jupiter Broadcasting asking about help with automation of audiobooks getting onto Audio Bookshelf. So I ended up writing a program in Python that basically grabs books from either Libation or Audio, Open Audible, and then creates the directory structure for you that is appropriate for Audio Bookshelf, and then puts the files there, and then kicks the API to say, hey, go scan these files. So I did that.
I love it. That's so cool. And just on your own time to say, hey, rest of internet nerds, if you want a way to get access to your audiobooks, here you go.
Yeah, it sounded like a challenge. It was like, well, right now my wife was doing the same thing, which is like download the book and then create the directory and then drag the file over. And it wasn't hard, but like I heard Chris complain about it. I'm like, I guess I'll do something about this now.
I can fix this. I'm empowered.
I can fix it.
I love it. Steve, you want to do some email?
Let's do it.
Our first email comes in tonight from Steven. Steven writes in and says, hi, Noah and Steve. I've been listening to Steve's image journey for the last few episodes, and I found it interesting that Steve found a way that image managed files incomprehensible. Perhaps it was because image divides things by user IDs or UUID by default. This can be changed by the use of labels. And folder structure, you can even have a sensible year, month, day, file.extension layout, or even something more custom if you enable the storage engine. Image also provides a mechanism to migrate between templates so that if the template that you work now doesn't work in the future, you can always migrate all of your existing files to the new template. The mechanism is run as a job on the jobs page. If you want to store assets in your album folder, but you also have the assets that don't belong to an album, you can use and then he gives the tag, else. If you want to conditional statements, for example, the following template will store assets in an album folder if they belong to that album, and in a folder named other/month if they do not belong to an album. And then he gives the example. Details on storage templates can be found here. More specifics on storage locations with and without storage templates can be found here. This might help with the metadata issue in the external library. It's probably having an issue based on the importer user. But this would keep things organized, and you could still back up from image or separately. Cheers, Stephen Brown II. So, Steve, I think what is most interesting to me about this email, this exactly mirrors every conversation I've ever had with an image user. So the conversation goes something like this. Oh, it's really cool. I really like it. I found that I can do these 5 things. Here are some of the things I've struggled with. And then they will tell you, oh, well, here's how to fix those things, and here's 4 other things you didn't know you could do. And so Stephen Brown II is drawing our attention to the storage locations. Interestingly and completely unrelated to Stephen Brown II, Kenny, heard our episode and went, oh, you guys are struggling with the stacking feature. Here's how you would use that, or here's how that comes into play. And so the people that like image really, really like image, Steve.
Yeah. So I guess my first comment is, I think that it's great that it gives you all the knobs. Here's the proverbial but. I think it's silly the way that the default chose the UUIDs. I guess I understand why it is. From a programming standpoint, makes sense. That is an easy way to easily match and control for things. However, I don't think that what I was seeing was necessarily an advanced use case where I expect my files and folders to look like blah, right? And so essentially it's go try and figure out how the templates work and then screw around with it and hope that you get it right. Because honestly, templating can be simple if it is simple, but it also, like, I struggle with the same thing with like like YTDLP, right? They use some sort of templating if you want to go and change the naming and all that sort of stuff. And you know what I did? I simply changed it in the code in my fork because I can't be bothered to learn the templating. I just simply was like, you know what? You already know this information. Just spit out the file like this. And so I guess all that to say is, I think it's great that these options exist, and it was non-obvious to me that this was the solution at the time. And part of that is like, I didn't understand what I was looking for, right? I didn't understand what the solution for the problem is because I couldn't describe my problem properly. I just was like, oh, well, this is kind of silly. And I didn't know how to describe it. So then I didn't really come across my answer. You know what I'm saying?
Kind of. So would you say that it's a function of, like many open source projects, it's probably a fantastically coded project. It just maybe could use some work in the PR/marketing/documentation department.
No. So, okay. I want to be clear. I think that the documentation on image is really good quality. I've definitely encountered much worse. And the storage class, like the storage template stuff, is documented. However, it's one of those things that I didn't know I should be looking for. So when I'm poking around at like, why is it like this, or related things, I was not able to come up with landing on the documentation.
Okay.
And even if I did, I personally don't do wonderfully with trying to interpret the templates.
Okay.
Right. And so part of it, like it's all comes back on me 100%. This is not on the project. It's just, I personally think that the grouping the files by UUID makes less sense when you're talking about pictures, because if you were ever going to try and introspect the file system, do you have your UUID memorized? Because I don't.
Oh, well, it's the important ones, like my wedding day, my baptism days, those kinds of things. I make sure to memorize the UU. I'm kidding. But you know what? Here'd be my counter argument to that. My counter argument would be, well, but is there some value in the idea that a UUID means you can't accidentally overwrite the wedding pictures with the graduation pictures, kind of a thing?
Oh, yeah. No, like I said, from a programming perspective, I get it. The UUID is a smart way to do that. It just isn't. It boils down to, it wasn't what I expected. I didn't know how to do the search properly for the term. And so we also had someone else write in. So we've had a few people come in and comment about the storage templates. This was just the email that I chose to highlight because we don't need 5 people telling me that I'm wrong. That takes way too much time.
Yeah.
No. But so I guess my point is, like, when you heard me describe the problem in English, people knew what I was trying to do. But when I was trying to come up with some fun way to search for that, I failed in my ability to concisely describe that in such a way that I would land on the result. So that was failing 1. And then failing 2 is I just don't like interpreting the template.
Okay. Just from a standpoint of it's an extra conversion thing that you've got to do.
It's just too much work. Like it's a step that I personally don't think that I should have to take. Like, and again, That's 100%. That is me, right? I just don't think that the default should be, here's a UUID. I think the default for when you're storing pictures is when people are using, like looking at it, it's like, this is the month, or like this is the year, this is the month, done, right? That makes sense. And I don't think that most people, yeah, that's it. It's just a difference of opinion.
So we really appreciate the feedback as you're going through this, your experience with Image or other things. As you have those things, please continue to write in. Please continue to share them with us. Steve and I love reading it. We love hearing what things are working well for you. Joshua writes in and says, "Hi, Noah and Steve. First, thanks for the podcast. I've been listening for several years and I enjoy it. I've been messing around with Docker containers for a while now. I have Ollama with an Open Web UI container and a Stable Diffusion container. I got them both working with the NVIDIA GTX 952GB GPU in my server. This is obviously not very much memory for doing AI work. It's just a goof around at home server. I'd like to upgrade the GPU, but it's not really worth spending a lot of money on. But looking at the M40 or M60 GPUs, I know they're not the best, but they have more memory than what I currently have. I don't really want to spend more than $100. Is that even worth it? Thanks for your hard work." So unbeknownst to Joshua, I actually asked Steve a very similar question. Hey, if you're getting into AI and you're not, ready to drop thousands and thousands of dollars on a brand new graphics card, what do you recommend? So Steve, if you woke up in his shoes, would you look at the M40 and the M60? So
part of the challenge that you will run into, especially in a year or two, is an issue with the drivers. So the 950 is already on the legacy drivers. If you're stepping back, there are several generations of cards that are older that might fit the price point and the requirement for the amount of RAM. However, there's a reason why they're cheap, and it's because these cards are at the end of life in terms of drivers, and drivers make a significant difference when you're talking about doing AI or any machine learning or anything like that, right? Mm-hmm. If you're just talking about, I need it to turn on a monitor like whoop-de-doo, all the old drivers will continue to do that. But when you're talking about any kind of the advanced stuff that we're trying to use the graphics card for, drivers make a difference. It's part of the reason why one of the first things that they say when you're having a problem with a video card is like, or a game is, did you upgrade the drivers? Because that has that much of an impact on it. Mm-hmm. So that all said, I would lean towards like an NVIDIA 1000 series card. It's only a generation newer, but you can get them somewhere between $70 and $100 for the 6 to 8 gig versions, and that will probably be a decent one for you. If you're looking to save a little bit, like $20, you can go a generation back and get a Quadro K5200, and the Quadros are going to perform slightly better. And I say slightly better because they're already meant to be workstation cards, etc. If you do go trolling around eBay, I would caution you not to get a Tesla card unless you know what you're doing, because oftentimes they don't have fans and they're meant to be used in conjunction with something else, yada, yada, yada. There's a whole bunch of disclaimers for the Tesla cards unless you know what you're buying. So stick with a desktop series or a workstation series card and you'll be fine. Like, I mean, if you're fine with the performance that you get on a 950, then, going out there and getting a 1060, for example, you could even go out and get a 1660 in equivalent price range for around $100, and you'll probably be more happy with the generational leap and the additional RAM there.
So check those out. If you're interested, anything else you would tell people if they were interested in getting into AI, Steve, is it by way of like, hey, if you're looking for a computer, or you're looking for, is it get a desktop that has enough PCI lanes to accept the graphics card and a power supply big enough to power both the computer and the graphics card you're buying? Is it that simple?
Well, I mean, don't you have to have a power supply that can supply the power for the computer?
I guess my question is there anything other that you would consider when purchasing a desktop, or is it simply a function of getting enough, enough electrical bunnies to power the graphics card and then put an operating system on it to talk to it?
Yeah, for the most part, for this low level of stuff, what really makes the difference is the amount of RAM and the number of CUDA cores that have. So I guess I should say currently, I would say stay away from the Intel and the AMD. AMD is getting significantly better in terms of the support for models, but that's ultimately where the bottleneck is. A lot of these the AI servers like Olama and so on may or may not support it, and the model itself may or may not struggle with it. Everybody runs off of the NVIDIA cards as the industry standard. You will be safe going that way.
People that want to branch out and look at like the AMD side of things, worth it or not quite yet?
You can do it if you are aware that you are going to, like, you're not, that's like saying, well, back in the day, can I get away with buying a Broadcom Wi-Fi chip and running Linux? Yes, you can. Be aware of what it is that'll happen. Like, it's not going to work with every distro, just like it's not going to work with every model and every AI model server out there, because most of the people are either focusing on NVIDIA or the integrated one for the Macs because the developers have a Mac and that's what they'll use.
Tyler writes in and says, I'm running a C-file instance through Docker and proxying behind an Nginx proxy manager. The webdev is on webdev.example.com and the C-hub is on files.example.com. I can log into webdev.example.com/cfdev and I can see my folders, but as soon as I try to click on a folder, it takes me to webdev.example.com/folder instead of webdev.example.com/cfdev/folder. Can you help me fix this? So, Steve, this was a conversation that unfolded actually in the Geek Lab, and Sleuth was kind enough to jump in and help, joining us via the magic of the Mumble Room. It is Sleuth. Welcome in, sir.
Good evening.
So I understand that the fix with this was not something terribly difficult, was not something terribly complex. What ended up being the answer?
Yeah, so I'd like to break it down and kind of go through me reading this in the Geek Lab for the first time, what I was thinking about in terms of what the solution might be. And so what stuck out to me immediately was when you set up most services, they expect to be, something.example.com, and then they have the whole file path, so / and then they get to do whatever they want with that. Most programs do have the ability to use subpaths, but most of them don't expect that out of the box. And so when he said that he can load the web UI on webdev.example.com/cfdev, but then as soon as he clicks a link in that web page, it no longer works, that tells me immediately that his reverse proxy works just fine, and the problem lies on the application sitting behind it, in this case, C-Hub. And so the solution is to tell C-Hub, hey, I'm running under this subpath of cfdev, so make sure you prepend every link that you generate with cfdev. And in this case, it happened to be a simple file edit in the configuration file.
Steve, can you give us a bit of a brief on the thing that comes after the /? What's that called?
So that is, at least in the Java world, that's called the context path. And so that tells the computer what section of the web service you are trying to access. So like if you go to Nextcloud, for example, if you watch the URL change, it'll say things like /files, /calendar, and so on. And that is the context path. So you can also change your context root, which is what Sleuth is talking about. So if the context root is normally / and you want your context root to always be /cfile, that's essentially just exactly what Sleuth has just said. It's basically just telling the service that is listening, hey, instead of /, you are actually your context root is going to be /cfile/dev. And that means any of your subdirectories are going to hang off of that instead of off of just the regular /.
Okay. So they set the service URL to files.example.com/cfdev and the file server route to files.example.com/cfhttp, and all of a sudden starts working again. Is that the short of it?
Yeah, that is some specific stuff to cfile, and because of the mix match of domains, I wasn't fully following him, but in general, that was the solution, and so he set the variables to be conducive to his environment, and everything started working.
Very cool. Hey, thanks for helping him out inside of the chat room, Sleuth.
Sure thing, anytime. geeklab:/linuxdelta.com.
Our fourth email comes in from Emmanuel. Emmanuel writes in and says, "Hello and greetings. I'm trying to help my church set up audio and visual streaming, and I need some advice. We have 2 spaces, the main church upstairs and a smaller chapel downstairs. I would like to hook up both spaces with audio video consisting of cameras wirelessly and microphones so that the service can be streamed and also monitored in church. I've heard you talk about the Stream Deck. Perhaps I could be part of the setup. Any ideas will be very welcome. Thanks for the show. P.S. We've been using a computer with WebEx. So far, sketchy success." All right, so let's start here. Let's start with the most reliable way to get a video audio signal from point A to point B is to run RG6 quad shielded cable. So if you just need to be able to, so RG6, when used in conjunction with SDI, will get you an uncompressed video signal plus 16 channels of audio. So you can move audio and video from one room to the other without losing anything instantaneously from one place to the other, and all you got to do is run a cable. Now, you say wirelessly, so that tells me that, well, maybe running SDI isn't a possibility. If I had to do it wirelessly, the next thing I would do is I would look at an all-hardware solution, something like a Teradek. It's going to cost you about $1,000 for both ends, but you'll get an HDMI transmitter and an HDMI receiver, and then you can do something as simple as plug in a Sony Handycam with an HDMI cable to the Teradek transmitter and plug the receiver into a television on the other side. And Bob's your uncle. You're going to have audio and video that are this is going from one space to the other. Now, you said streaming. So I'm guessing we're wanting to eventually get this out onto the internet so that other people in the church can watch it online. A couple different ways you can do that. So the 800-pound gorilla in the church space is Resi, R-E-S-I. And it's a service, it's a cloud service, and they build you a custom CentOS or Alma box that has a built-in SDI capture card into it. And you can only use that box with their service, but their service provides an opportunity for you to stream up to Resi. Then you can insert I'm sorry, it's not Resi.com, it's Resi.io. Thank you. Then you can insert the stream URL into your church's site, and then you can schedule it. Say, hey, here's when it's going to go live. What it will do, it will record that and then make it available as content on demand afterwards for the church. Now you say to yourself, but Noah, I don't want it to be cloud hosted. I came to you because I wanted to own the solution for myself. Also, by the way, I don't want to buy an encoder for a few $1,000s that I can only use with a cloud service. No problem. I got you. So the second way that you can do it, spin up a DigitalOcean droplet, $10 a month, load Owncast on there, and get yourself any computer that has a network connection and load that machine up with OBS. Now you've got a number of options. Option 1, cheap and easy, and probably very similar to what you already have. Just take the existing webcam or whatever it is you're using now, plug it into that box and stream it up to OBS. Now you can go into the other room and play the stream right from Owncast. You can do that either on a television, on a dedicated box, on a Raspberry Pi, doesn't really matter. You'll be able to pull that stream down into that other room. Additionally, it will be available on your church site, so anybody that goes there is able to pull the stream down. Now you want to make it a little bit better, or you want to skate a little bit further ahead of the puck, and you don't just want to reuse some equipment. If I were going to purchase a camera, I would purchase an NDI camera. An NDI camera is a camera that, instead of sending its video signal through HDMI or SDI, sends it through the network delivery interface, which is a video delivery interface that runs over the network. The nice thing is it works flawlessly in OBS by just adding the NDI plugin. What's the advantage of using NDI over HDMI or SDI? Well, for one, you're dropping Cat6 cable, which is 10 cents a foot, instead of RG6, which is closer to 80 or 90 cents a foot. The other thing is you can repurpose network jobs for a bunch of different things. And thirdly and lastly, you probably already have a network connection in both of those rooms, so you wouldn't necessarily have to wire anything. And it's a great way to push low latency, high quality video, again with audio, across the network and then pull it out on the other side. You can stream it up to OBS, you can play it on the TV, or you could record it and do a mixture of all three. The last thing I'll throw in your box, and we'll have a link for, there's a camera I really like. It's made by a company called Aida, A-I-D-A. They're about $400. They call it the Cube. The last thing I'll throw out there for you is kind of my go-to when churches say, hey, we need a streaming solution. A C920, an Intel NUC, and there's a Chinese knockoff of the Scarlett 2i2 that's available on Amazon for about $90. That's a really good go-to. Pull it out of the box, throw Linux Mint or, Kubuntu or even Red Hat or Fedora and install OBS, and it'll be more than enough horsepower to get a single stream going. So let me know where that gets you, how far that gets you, what problems you run into, and we would love to help you further. Steve, do you have anything to add, or does that sum up Emmanuel's answer of sorts?
I think you about covered it. You normally knock these things out of the park. I just kind of ride shotgun with you and follow you around as you're solving these things.
I love it.
From the Linux Newswire newsroom, this is the Week in Review with JT.
For the week of March 2nd, 2025, here's the Linux and open source news. The Fish Shell has announced the release of 4.0. dbeaver 25.0 is out. Emacs 30.1 has been released. The KDE team has released a bug fix version 6.3.2 KDE Plasma. EA has open sourced 4 more Command & Conquer games. The Nextcloud team has announced Nextcloud Hub 10, a unified modular digital workspace. NVIDIA has released a new stable Linux 570 driver with improved variable refresh rate support. In open source hardware news, a German startup has published open source plans for a nuclear fusion power plant. In open source security news, Black Duck has released its annual open source security and risk analysis report, analyzing 1,600 examinations of 965 commercial codebases within 16 industries. According to their findings, 86% of codebases had open source software vulnerabilities, while 81% had high or critical risk vulnerabilities. Universities and government organizations in North America and Asia have been targeted by a previously undocumented Linux malware called OpenColor between November and December 2024, according to new findings from Palo Alto Networks Unit 42. A new Linux malware named AutoColor grants hackers full remote access to compromised systems. The Open Source Security Foundation has launched an initiative to provide maintainers of open source software projects with a set of baseline security requirements that can be realistically attained and maintained by small teams. And in open source AI news, WhisperCat is an open source transcription and post-processing app that has recently announced version 1.4. And lastly, Chinese e-commerce site Alibaba has announced that its newest video and image generation artificial intelligence model, WAN 2.1, is now publicly available and open source, in a move likely to increase its uptake and intensify competition in AI.
So we got a piece of feedback that came in, and as we read through it, we thought, well, maybe there's some specific examples that we could point out to this particular person, but we could potentially broaden it to a larger topic. And so that topic is getting involved in the Linux and open source community. Now, you can do that whether or not you want to get a job, whether you want to drive an income for it, or if you just want to become more involved. So we'll start out by I guess going through a little bit about exactly what was asked. And really what was asked was, hey, he's actually in your neck of the woods, Steve, in South Dakota, and said, hey, I'm potentially looking for a job. Do you know, I'm looking for new employment. Can you help me? Can you reach out, or can you help me understand what I might be looking at? And things I'm interested in I have a robust skill set in Linux and system administration, deep enthusiasm for open source. My experience includes things like operating systems and OpenWRT, Debian. I'm proficient in Docker instances and managing SSH and these sorts of things. And so we thought this might be a broader topic that might apply to broader people. So let's start here. Steve, when somebody sits down with you and says, I'm potentially interested in a job, what are some of the things that are very appealing to you that you're like, that person goes to the front of my attention? And then what are some of the things that you're like, yeah, that's right to straight file 13?
Well, let's start there, because that amuses me a little more. So I sit on hiring boards for Red Hat, both internal and external, and I do a decent amount year to year. And one of the things that you would think would go without saying is don't lie on your resume. However, the number of people I would say just in the last 3 months that I've looked at, I easily, at least 3 people per month in the last 3 months that I have looked at have verifiably lied on their resume. And by that, I mean, I have 12 years experience with software X, and you go look up and like, well, the release notes for this say it was first released in 2017. So I don't know how you did that. And that automatically makes you highly suspect. And you need to be careful with how you're presenting yourself. Like for me, that's an immediate no. If you're just lying, you're lying. And especially what really irks me about some of these is just you're applying to Red Hat for our software. We know when the software was created. Like if that may fly outside of the direct vendor, because I don't know how many people actually would go and look at the details. And in fact, even internally at Red Hat, I can say that when I brought this up in hiring panels in the past, I was the only one that actually caught that. And just like that sort of stuff jumps out at me. Like it may look good on passing the screener because, hey, this person has so much experience with the software, but don't do that. Like you're really setting yourself up for failure. On the flip side of that, what I do like is a statement of how much you're interested in, or like not necessarily that, hey, I'm really passionate in this thing, but overwhelmingly the consensus is if you claim to do a thing, be prepared to talk about it, right? I am less interested in the fact that you don't know the thing than I am if you say you know the thing and I quiz you and you fail.
Right.
That again sets me off because that means like I can't trust you. I can't trust you to put you in front of the client because you
don't
lied
know what
to
you
me.
don't know. Yeah, right.
Exactly.
Or worse, bad is you don't know what you don't know. Worse, you know what you don't know and you choose to lie or hide it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's
that
a
is
death
well said.
sentence in our industry, right? Because you get in over your head. Like bad things happen when you're in over your head. Worse things happen, like catastrophic things happen when you're in over your head and you keep going.
And so there's the catastrophic from the practical stance, like I made thing go boom. That is terrible, right? But there's also reputation damage, and reputation damage is far worse.
Yes.
Far worse than making a thing go boom. And Noah has lots of stories that he could choose to tell about how, because of a sterling reputation, that, certain incidences were more acceptable because of the sterling reputation, as opposed to, if you got a bad reputation and you've made a little blip, that is much more severe than you have a sterling reputation and you made a mistake and you owned it.
Yeah, that, without going into too many details, the short version of what you're talking about there is if people learn that they can trust you, they're more tolerant of an honest mistake. The problem, what you're drawing some attention to is we haven't even gotten to the honest mistake. You haven't earned the opportunity to make an honest mistake because you haven't been honest yet. You haven't even hired you yet, and you're already lying to me, kind of a thing, right? And I think part of what, as human beings, what bothers us about being lied to is it makes us feel stupid, right? If I lie to you, I'm going to tell you I've been doing this thing longer than that thing's even been around, and you're too dumb, you're too stupid to figure it out. And I'm smarter than you, so I'll get one over on you, right? And I think that just has a very off-putting feel to it.
Yeah. Yep. The thing, so I know that people have said this, but it really is true. It was hard for me to believe when I was searching for jobs earlier in my career as well, because it just doesn't sound like a thing. But honestly, I'm okay with you having to learn the ins and outs of the thing so you don't have to come in as an expert. We're generally okay with that if you're well-spoken, if you show that you have a level of intelligence. So one of the things that I really like is I really like it when people tell me they don't know, as opposed to making something up, right? You can okay, now there's a clarification here. You can take a stab at something. Right. That's okay. But there are people where you're just like, they just keep going, and you can tell that they're just trying to keep talking until, they get past the question or whatever, as opposed to just, I much prefer someone say, you know what, I don't know, but the way that I would solve this would be, I would say, you know what, I don't know, but I'm going to look that up, or let me get the answer for you. Like those sorts of things are significantly better than losing the confidence. So how do you portray that in a resume? you can't really portray that in a resume. So I guess that falls more into like, how do you actually land the job? In a resume, a wall of text doesn't help either. Like,
Yes. Oh my gosh, yes.
so there's some balance that is completely subjective, right? Between bullet points and a wall of text. And I'm not exactly sure. And you know what? Today I saw a resume that was a bullet point wall of text. And I didn't think that was possible, but they basically used single spaces, and the first 3 pages, I'm not kidding, were just bullet points. But not like bullet points with 5 or 6 words, like bullet points that went to the end of the margin. And I just didn't even know what to do with that. So there's some fine line there. Like the resume has to be somewhat appealing and stand out from from other people. I can tell when people have used the same software, because you pick it up and you're like, I swear I've seen this resume before. And all it is just like a different name or something like that. And so when you're sorting through, I've got 3 open recs right now. I'm sorting through 30 something resumes, and I've got 20 minutes to do it because that's the time that I have to spare. Like, your resume has to stand out in some fashion. I personally like, what grabs my attention is when people bold things, because that draws my attention to what they're trying to tell me. Don't bold everything, but like bold a word or whatever. And that if there's something you want me to know, like, do something with the font and draw my attention there, because honestly, we're scanning. We're not reading top to bottom. Like, we may hit Control F if we've got a digital copy, or if it's a physical copy, you're kind of scanning for the information that's really important to you. Because I'm hiring for a specific thing, and most people don't tailor for that specific thing. They just make a general resume and throw it everywhere. You shouldn't do that, but that's what most people do. And so then what that causes is the people who are ingesting the resumes are going to scan them instead of actually reading what you put out. So if there's something you really want my attention for, make that look different, and my eyes will automatically stop there.
So let's talk. I want to go back to the wall of text thing, because I didn't realize I had an opinion until you said something, and I'm realizing I have an opinion. So if you graduated high school, or you're just getting through college, and you drop a resume off and it's 9 pages long, you should rethink that. Because you don't have 9 pages worth of experience. You just got out of college, and so there's you kind of touched on this. There's a temptation to, like, I want to make myself sound as amazing as possible. Really, especially in our field, it's going to be very difficult, if not impossible, to BS your way through an interview, because we do the same things. And oftentimes the people we work for they don't know what they're hiring for. So they put that off on us, right? And they'll say, maybe this is less true in your job, Steve, because you work for an actual software company, but in my world, it's not uncommon at all for them to say, hey, we're hiring an IT resource. We're going to have our IT contracting company there so that they can guide us on what to hire. And I will tell you, what I'm looking for is, so everybody has, if you've got, I'm making certain judgments based on your agent and what I think should be your experience level based on how long you tell me that you're working in the industry. And that will dictate how much patience I have to read through a resume. So if you have, I'm going to throw a number out. I'm going to say 5 years or less of experience, your resume should fit on a page. You should be able to get what you've done. I don't care about your 9 high school accomplishments or what clubs you're in. Should you have a line item or 2 for extracurricular activities? Yes, do that. Tell me that you're involved in things and you're not just a hermit, that you come to work, you do your thing, and then you go home and nobody sees you. It's good to know that you're a well-rounded person. I appreciate that part. But get it down to a page. And so that when somebody looks at it, and don't bury the resume. This is the other thing I see. People will bury their resume inside of a cover page and a statement letter. No, just if you're going to have those things, make sure the most important things that, as you were saying, Steve, the things that would bold or jump off to you, make sure that's on top or as close as you can to the top. Sometimes they'll have a packet or whatever, and you don't have a choice. There's something that goes over it. But the first thing you have control over, in order of this is what I want people to see, bring that up. And then now if you have, 25 years of experience, well, then I would expect to see a couple of pages on what organizations have you worked for and what did you do at those organizations. One thing that Sleuth brought up in our pre-show meeting that I thought was really poignant: don't tell me what your skills are, demonstrate to me what you've done with those skills. So it's one thing to say, I'm proficient in Ansible. It's something else entirely to say, I worked for a company in which we migrated, 300 bank branches remotely using Ansible. That gives me, by doing that, you've done a couple of things. One is you've given me something verifiable to check against, right? So if you tell me I went and accomplished this huge task or this huge project, I can go to that employer or I can go to that person and say, hey, what if anything, can you share with me about that? Now, oftentimes the answer is going to be, well, we'd love to share with you that person worked from this date to that date. Any other questions? And then that's really all they'll tell you, which is fine. But it gives me a starting place. But you don't have to tell me I'm proficient at Ansible if you've done this or you've done some large project leveraging a piece of software. It's kind of like you're telling me what you're doing without telling me what you're doing, and I think that can be very valuable too. That can be a really great way to make yourself stand apart. The other thing I want to touch on, because I feel like I'd be remiss if we didn't bring this up, Steve, can you touch a little bit on how do I want to phrase this question? Can you touch a little bit on the willingness to care about the long-term goal and the long-term investment for working at a company more than just getting through the interview process? That is to say, you're willing to maybe make some upfront compromises, maybe even some really severe, deep compromises that seem counterintuitive to your goal, but it's with the larger goal in mind of, I want to be here 10 years from now, so what can I do today to get my foot in the door so that 10 years from now I'm in a better position to be doing the work I want to be doing?
Yeah, that is a really tough one. And this is, you know what? I think of all of the advice that is generally given out on the subject, this is the one that's ignored the most. And I would say almost to 100% ignored. And part of that is because it involves humbling yourself. So one of the things that you'll hear Noah say is go out and volunteer somewhere, right? Mm-hmm. Go try to make yourself useful somewhere. That gets ignored. The idea that, so when I interviewed for Red Hat, I was like, I want to work for you. I've wanted to work at this company since I learned about Linux way back in 2004. Give me something. And I told the interviewers, I will work in your mailroom. I don't care what it is, but I will work somewhere for Red Hat, and then I will work my way up into something that's useful. And I was serious about that. The problem is you have to humble yourself for that. And it goes counter to the advice that you get, generally speaking. If you are trying to chase a position, that is bad advice, right? If you're trying to prove to a company that you want to be there, and usually this is for a passion or because you want to use it as a stepping stone, both are a valid thing, right? So mm-hmm. if you want to do robotics and you can get in at, I don't know, Raytheon, or pick a giant place, right? That will be a springboard because you got your security clearance and, you get some credit for that. Like there's a bunch of industry cred that you'll get for working there. So just getting in the door at those places will open doors for you. Mm. The other approach is like, philosophically, I want to work for you because I believe in the mission that you're putting out. If you find yourself in either of those situations, the advice is prove to the company in the best way that you can that you want to work for them. So it's not, I'm going to take this position. I want to work for you enough that you tell me where I can fit in and I will do that job, right? And that is a humbling thing that often is ignored. It just is ignored because you feel ridiculous saying it, or, at the point where I started working for Red Hat, I had already had multiple jobs, like decent jobs. I worked for IMAX. I worked for a company that ran the web, like the auto industry's website. So I worked for a company that hosted those. I had worked for like loan software. So like I had worked for big, like decent places. And I still was like, you know what? I still want to work here bad enough because I believe in this mission. I'm going to do whatever it is that allows me to work here. So how would you respond to the same question, Noah?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've kind of been chewing on it most of the afternoon, and largely what I've landed on is the first thing I think I would do, I would try to go get involved in a local group of sorts, either a local Linux group or, the other thing is look at charities, look at nonprofits, look at places that will need help and that will be an easy way to get your foot in the door. And here's the correlation I would make. The correlation I would make is that often, what they'll tell kids when they're first branching out into their own financial independence, and they'll say, if you're to build up credit, if you can't get approved for a credit card, go get the store card first, the little in-store like Target card kind of a thing, and go charge that, and then once you prove yourself with that, then go apply for a credit card and get a real big boy credit card, that sort of thing. Now, the example isn't perfect because I would not encourage people to go into debt. It's neither here nor there, but the idea is you take the smaller thing that you don't really want just so that you have the opportunity to get your foot in the door. Same thing can be true here. If you go find yourself a food bank or a church or a violence intervention center or a nonprofit and say, hi, I'm so-and-so, I'm good with tech. Do you have tech that breaks? Because I'll come fix that for you either for free or at a really, really discounted rate. What can we make work? The other thing I would encourage you to do, if you feel like you have some sea legs under you, that is to say you feel pretty proficient, you've maybe done something, you've worked in the industry before, if you've had a job, maybe it doesn't have brand recognition, but you feel like you know what you're doing, don't be hesitant to walk into a place and say, hey, I know you got somebody doing something for you, but I'm willing to make you a better deal. So what, and lead with generosity. Lead with generosity. There's a really good book. I'm not going to be able to remember the title. I'm going to see if I can quick Google it, but Jab, 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 Right Hook. And it is a book written by Gary, what's his last name? It's a book written by Gary Vaynerchuk. That's his name. And basically the short version of the short version of the book is, if you give people something, give people something, give people something, give people something, when you come for the ask, they already had their hand out and they already had their money in their hand. Because they already wanted to pay you. They already wanted to give back to you because you've done so much for them already. You can call it priming the pump. You can call it, paying it forward. You put whatever words you want around it. But the general idea is lead with generosity. Be willing to go out and do a thing and don't expect anything in return. When you show up there and you're going to get, the other thing is be prepared for unsexy problems. So some of the most meaningful work I've ever done in my IT career, maybe that's putting it a bit much, but if it is, I'm not exaggerating this a lot. Some of the most meaningful work I've ever done that's had some of the biggest impact is some of the least sexy, untechnical things I've ever done. One of the first things I did at a major church when they brought me in, I spent the whole first week resetting iPads and setting a consistent screen lock thing so that everybody could unlock them, because they were all tied to various different people's iCloud accounts and people that had left, and there was 2FA that was coming to people's cell phones that hadn't been there in years. So just cleaning all that stuff up. Was it sexy? No. Was there anything open source about it? Not a thing. Did I find particular enjoyment in it? No. It was largely just a bunch of headaches and the same laborious process over and over and over and over and over again. But that's what needed to be done in that moment, and it led to other things because they were grateful that somebody frankly cared enough to step up and say, okay, let's go clean all of this up. There have been times where I've gotten into organizations, and again, nonprofits, they don't have money to spend on these sorts of things. So you often walk in and it is a lot of, what Simon Quigley calls cowboying, right? And so you walk in, what's in here? Oh, it's the backup server. Okay, well, it's not even on. Let's turn it on. Okay, let's log into it. Oh, it doesn't seem like it's backing anything up. Oh, look, here's a piece of software that's backing up. It was backing up this source. Where's that box? Well, that's over here. Okay, well, that one's on. It's just not getting backed up. Well, let's see if we can fix that. And you just kind of step your way through finding what was left there and pick up all the pieces and do the best you can. And then when you run into a roadblock and say, hey, we need to spend a little money here, we need to fix this thing there, we need to do this, doing little things like that will over time build trust, and trust will then translate into, when you make an ask, hey, I'd like you to hire me, pay me, contract with me, whatever it is, they're much more likely to say yes to, in this case, Tyler, the person who helped them for the past 6 months, year, whatever it is. If it doesn't work out and you no longer find enjoyment in it, there's no law saying you can't just, you can pack up and say, oh, I'm just not going to do this anymore. It's not really fulfilling to me. But I would start there, and then I would work my way into a paid gig. Oftentimes what you're going to find is if you just show up and start doing good work for free, for volunteer, for peanuts, for trade, I've done that too. If you're willing to do that, 9 out of 10 times somebody is going to come along and offer you a job, either at the place you're working or someplace else. I can't recall if I've shared this story on this show before. I know I've shared it on Critical Thought, but there was a guy. I went for sandwiches with my wife and my father-in-law, and they picked a restaurant I can't stand. I hate the restaurant. I hate everything in there. I think it's overpriced. There's nothing there I like, and I knew that before I ever walked in, but it was my father-in-law, and I'm trying to have my wife have a good time, and so I'm a good son-in-law, so I show up, and I walk in, and this guy at the front desk at the sandwich, he cannot let it go. It is a bridge too far that these people would come in and they would order something and he wouldn't. And I am not being nice to this person, right? So what do you want? I don't want anything. Well, can I interest you in this? No, that's what I don't want anything means. It means I don't want anything. Well, how about this? No, are you deaf or you can't? He would not let it go. He just kept, and over time, so finally he lands on this sandwich. And at first I'm like, this is the dumbest thing. But the more he talks about it, the better the sandwich starts to sound, kind of. And then he starts asking me questions about, well, what do you like? And I like pizza. And I'm trying to give him things that I know this place doesn't have. And he's taking that information. He's like, okay, I can work with that. I can work with that. And he's trying to think to himself what sandwich he can then modify to me. And long story short, he ends up coming up with something that actually sounded pretty dang good. And I'm like, all right, you win. I'll take the sandwich. And so I get the sandwich, and it was delicious. And I'm sitting there, and I'm halfway through the sandwich, and I instantly, the guilt and the regret starts to build in, because I've not been particularly pleasant to this person up until this point. I didn't really want a sandwich, and it turns out he was right all along, and I was just too arrogant to go read through the menu and actually put the effort into finding something I could shove down my gullet. It also drastically improved the, what you might say, atmosphere, because then all 3 people that were sitting down the restaurant had something to eat. So the guy really did me a solid, and as I'm halfway through my sandwich, I'm starting to realize, man, this guy really did me a solid by convincing me to get this sandwich. And then I start thinking, man, I walked into this building firmly convinced I wasn't buying a sandwich. I said I didn't like it, and here I spent money on a sandwich. How did you do that to me? And so I went back up there and I gave him my card, and I'm like, hey, if you ever get sick of selling sandwiches, go take that skill of somebody is upset and frustrated and you sense it. You don't get upset about it. You're constantly smiling. You got a good attitude about it, and you work even when you're told not to fix a problem that you were more invested in my problem of the sandwich than I was. So if you'd like to make more money than a sandwich place will pay you to do that, come do that with me with IT. And I promise you'll make more money in the long run. And oh, by the way, that's a unique skill set that you got there. The ability to identify a problem and then you invest yourself into it. Why? He didn't make any money off of me. I mean, he gets his hourly wage whether or not I buy the sandwich, but he saw a problem and he just wasn't going to let it go. And so do that, and you're going to attract the attention, if not of a person that is actually in the business, you'll attract it from somebody else who will see it on the periphery. The music in my ears, which I'll be honest with you, hits my ears at somewhat of a surprise, means we're out of time. I thank you for joining us. The show is live every Tuesday, 6 p.m. Central. I'll be in Los Angeles Thursday. Lots of stuff going on for the Southern California Linux Expo. There's a meetup Saturday night. We'll be doing dinner, and then I hope to see you around the conference. Live Ask Noah Show Friday, 1 p.m. Pacific. Join us online at AskNoahShow.com. We're back next Tuesday, 6 p.m. Central, AskNoahShow.com. Have a good week.